Chapter 25. Conspiración. "You all right, Liam?" Hugo asked as Liam collected himself. The other teen boys and girls, some Liam knew from the buses but most were new faces, were also righting themselves, having sacrificed themselves as impromptu crash mats. Liam was relieved to have at least landed in the same cage as Hugo. It was one stroke of good luck among many bad. Yeah, gracias, lo siento, Liam said, extracting himself from the tangle of bodies and drawing on the little Spanish he could remember beyond no hablo español and piso mojado. The others took Liam's short phrases as a sign he was fluent, launching into rapid Spanish. Hugo knew better. He slowed them, asking if any of them knew English. It was another stroke of random luck for Liam, that enough did that they could effectively switch back and forth, at least enough for him and everyone else in this cage to follow. There were exactly 24 of them locked up together in this cage. They were a mix of ages and genders. The cages to either side of them had similar numbers of kids, and the cages after that and the cages after that, extending all along the perimeter of the ghost box. There had to be hundreds of kids, even before their 3 buses had arrived. All of them in cages. All of them trapped. It didn't take long for Liam to realize that 2 of the oldest kids in their cage, Valentin and Leo, were the leaders. Valentin was Afro-Latina and from Ecuador, her skin a few shades darker than Liam's. Leo was a lighter brown and from El Salvador. The younger children listened to whatever Valentin and Leo said, as if their lives depended on it. They probably did. From what Liam could gather, the detainees had formed themselves into an organized and hierarchical resistance, with 2 older kids acting as cage captains in each cage. Younger kids fell in line under them. There was a wide array of accents, dialects, complexions, and countries of origin than Liam could have ever guessed. Latin America appeared to be home to white kids, black kids, brown kids, and everything in between. But they were all united in 3 things: Spanish, a determination to get out, and a bewilderment, building on horror, at the supernatural powers that they had just witnessed. Even though he was among the oldest of the bunch, Liam felt young, inexperienced, and generally stupid. He didn't speak a second language. He'd never survived a grueling trip across a desert, dodging police, human traffickers, gangs, not to mention riding on train cars and going for days without water, food, or sleep. He had nothing on these kids. It didn't take long for Leo and Valentin and some of the other kids from the buses to recognize that the gringas voladoras, as they had taken to calling the Rowe sisters, knew Liam. Leo and Val turned to Liam and wanted to know how. One thing led to another, and it wasn't long before the entirety of Liam's story was tumbling out. Gerald, the demons, the devils, the frat boys, the sorority sisters, Wendigos, manticores, chimeras, all of it. It was the least he could do now, reveal everything, considering their shared circumstances. Liam was actually relieved to finally be able to divulge his whole story to Hugo. At one point, when Val and Leo translated for the other kids, Hugo asked, "Liam, why didn't you say any of these before?" "You would have thought I was crazy." Hugo shrugged. "Yeah, I probably would have." But now Liam's full story was all anyone wanted. Val and Leo wanted any and all insight they could glean about the occult powers they were up against. The questions were coming at Liam fast. One kid would translate a question into English for Liam to answer, while others were still translating his last answer into Spanish. The Whisper network was effective, too, with younger kids going to either side of the cage to relay information to the other cells. Conversations sprung up in hushed whispers all around them. Even in the cages adjacent to their own, Liam could understand little, but he could recognize brainstorming when he heard it. These kids, some having been in detention for upward of a year, had developed a familiarity and shorthand among themselves. They took this challenge in stride and were already developing their next plan. Facing deserts, rivers, mountains, smugglers, rapists, and corrupt officials, even the train of death, 3 sorority sisters with dark supernatural gifts didn't faze them. One fierce-looking girl, with pigtails and a skin tone close to Liam's, was particularly adroit at organizing the youngest children. She ordered them to and fro in relays to either side of the cages, sending, receiving, and filtering information. The young kids moved in quiet coordination, each well accustomed to their role. The girl in pigtails would decide when a message merited sharing with Val and Leo. She would send a child over with it. She couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. She didn't speak a word of English, but she was like a battlefield general. Her scowl would have been comical if she had not been so utterly serious. In a break between questions, while one of Liam's answers was being translated, he walked over and asked her for her name. He tapped his chest, saying his own name, then pointed to her. Isadora, she said, not missing a beat between calling one child back from the side of the cage and sending off another. She paid Liam little heed and clearly had more important things to do than get to know him. He went back to the teens. By the time Liam had finished answering the next barrage of questions, he heard the words Diablos and Demonios making the rounds. So how do we defeat them? Valentine asked next. I don't know, Liam said, bereft of ideas. You said you had this Diablo working with you? Gerald? Leo said. Well, he's more like a demonio. That's demon, right? Let's not quibble on translation just now, Liam, Hugo said. But it does make a difference to them. The demons aren't evil by nature. The devils, they are. Good to know, then. So this guy, Gerald, a demon, is not evil, Leo continued. Well, he's a bit annoying. He has a thing for cheese, but yeah, not evil. You can call him? Val asked. Oh, yeah, I guess I can try. Can you now? She followed up. It surprised Liam that he hadn't thought of it before. He remembered the battered state Gerald had been in after tangling with the manticore. Liam had just assumed the demon needed time to recover and would return when he could, but now would be a great time for him to make an entrance. They needed some supernatural expertise. Liam nodded and did what he could to summon Gerald, saying his name 3 times. Nothing. Everyone remained poised, waiting. Their eyes roved around the corners of the cage, even looking in one another's eyes to see if someone had become possessed by a visiting spirit. Fear, curiosity, and hope intermingled. I'm sorry, Liam said, deflated. If he hasn't appeared by now, he's not coming. Liam tried hard not to betray the unexpected sense of loss and worry that followed. Was Gerald dead? Why did that possibility make Liam feel bad? Then we're on our own, Leo said, undeterred. Val, what have the other teams reported? By other teams, Liam figured they meant the other bunches of kids in all the other cells. 126 new arrivals, Val said. 8 of which are missing. 7 of the missing kids were ones with amputations, 1 without. Isadora had done her job of gathering intel well. We know 2 of those missing are Mateo and Michel, Hugo said, from La Caravana de los Mutilados. That's what you call yourselves? Val asked. Somos sobrevivientes de la bestia, Hugo said, Liam trying to follow. Dios mío, por supuesto. Where did they send them? Liam asked. Val turned to Isadora. More Spanish. ¿Y si a dónde enviaron los niños desaparecidos? Aquí a puerta de las oficinas. Izzy fired back. Sounds like they're all in this special section, Hugo said. Do we know what's in there? Shrugs all around. Don't know, man, Leo said. They've never used it before today. No puede ser bueno, someone said. Yeah, it can't be good, Leo echoed. Liam caught a tremor in Hugo's face before he turned away, but it wasn't fast enough to hide his tears. The others were quiet. Hugo's shoulders shook. Only Isadora had the temerity to step away from her station at the edge of the cage, walk over, and rub Hugo's back. Hugo was a stranger to her, but one in need of comfort. Liam, realizing he was the only person in the cage who knew Hugo's story and also had a companion in this special section, went over and put his arm around Hugo. Teo, he's my brother, Hugo said through falling tears. There were so many. His eyes full, his lashes dripping, his nose running. It was as if years of buried heartbreak and pain had finally caught up with him, finally broken him now that Mateo was not by his side. Enough bad things have happened to him, Hugo said, wiping his face with the palms of his hands. He's suffered enough. We'll get them out. We'll get them all out, Liam said, even if he didn't know how. Yeah, we will, Leo said, coming alongside them. That riot, it was just a test, you know? A distraction, really. Hugo swallowed and tried blinking away tears. He wiped his nose on his shirt. No one had any tissues. A smile was tugging on the corners of Leo's mouth and crinkling the edges of his eyes. We knew we wouldn't succeed with escape, but we had an ulterior objective, and we accomplished that. Hugo sniffed. What was it then? The careworn lines that had previously made Leo look older melted away. He actually looked like a kid for the first time since Liam had fallen into this cage. Leo nodded wordlessly toward Valentine and Isadora, as if to draw Liam and Hugo's attention to them. Val and Isadora both lifted the hems of their shirts. Tucked into the belt of their jeans, against the brown of their midriffs, were tasers. Stolen from the guards, Leo said. While some of us distracted them with our uprising, the others helped themselves. Helped all of us, actually, Val said, dropping her shirt back down over her taser. Isadora offered her own devilish grin as she let her shirt down, too. She was wildly satisfied. ¿Cuántos más? Leo asked. 7, Isadora said. We have 7 altogether among the cages, Leo translated for Liam. Isn't that enough that they'll notice? Hugo asked. Oh, they'll notice, Leo said, but they'll be embarrassed, too. We're hoping that we'll keep the guards from reporting them missing right away. These guys are not professionals. They don't want to lose their jobs, one of the other teens who had been there a while said. It gives us a small window, Valentine said. They might not want their jobs when they learn who they're really working for, Hugo said. That's right, Leo said. Officer Trey seems to be the only one in on the secret. That must be why they send all the other bossos out before those college girls lit things up. Has Trey got powers? Valentine asked. He's inhumanly big, Hugo said, but we didn't see any powers on the ride over. A beat of silence followed until Valentine spoke up. Whatever the case, we know we need to act fast. Chapter 26. Punishment. Their punishment from their jailers was sparse food scraps for 5 days and only minimal water rations. The canine guards, the bozos as Val called them, returned, patrolling the corridors with their dogs, their swagger, and their sunglasses. There were no trips allowed to the showers or the bathrooms. Instead, each cage was provided a bucket, which got filled to the brim in a few hours. The bozos would pick an unlucky kid to carry it out, empty, and clean it twice a day. With a bucket so big and close to overflowing, it was impossible to carry it without becoming soiled. The bozos entertained themselves picking the smallest kids possible for the duty and laughing as they inevitably spilled on themselves as they wrestled with the oversized buckets. Officer Trey himself walked along the edges of the complex, completing a circuit of the ghost box each morning. He would take that occasion to remind the detainees that they had broken the law by crossing into the U.S. This made them criminals, illegals, and they were lucky to be treated as well as they had been. The children were quiet. Everyone was lethargic with hunger and thirst, but even if everyone remained seated or lying down, dormant and apparently docile, Liam knew the opposite to be true. These were not postures of laziness, but rather of wary survivors, conserving what energy they had for the next fight. It had the desired effect. As the days passed, the bozo guards grew lax, some even smuggling in earbuds that they surreptitiously kept in one ear to listen to music. Some listened to podcasts and swapped notes on them, anything to fight off the boredom of another day of patrolling cages of lazy wetbacks. Jane, Samantha, and Chelsea all returned on Wednesday afternoon, then all day Friday. They patrolled with the guards for a few circuits. But mostly the girls spent time behind the doors of the special section, where their typing skills were being put to use for data entry. At least, this was what Isadora and her companions gathered from spying on the guards' conversations. Liam was able to figure out that, as interns, the row girls would likely keep to regular shifts, as dictated by their class schedules. This allowed Val and Leo to plan with other cage captains as to when they would make their next move. Hugo carried them through the long, boring, calorie-deprived hours as they waited. Even more than their cell captains, Hugo was steadfast, motivated by his own resolve to reach and free his brother. "I'm holding it together for Matteo," he said one night to Liam, "because I know Theo held things. He's holding things together for me. Even now, he's the best person I know." Hugo slept next to the door of the cage, a bit off-center as to be close to the corner. That way he could be the first to respond to the soft psst from the neighboring cage, alerting him to news moving along the whisper network. Isadora slept opposite Hugo, always ready to relay information to or from the opposite corner. On his own, a few times, Liam tried to summon Gerald again. It never worked. The uncertainty around the demon's fate was almost as unbearable as the uncertainty concerning Mitchell. But when Liam was anxious with worry for Mitchell or Gerald, support came from an unexpected source: Isadora. Despite being young, she was attuned to the older children and teens. She sat in on their planning discussions and even seemed to be able to track some conversations in English. This kept her informed. As a result, the younger children looked up to her. More than once, Izzy would settle down against the bars next to Liam and put a hand on his knee as if to say, there, it will all be okay." She never spoke any more than Spanish to Liam, so he could not understand her. The content of her words was never as important as her tone. For a while, Liam had trouble accepting the compassion from a starved waif of a girl so far from her home and family, if she even had a family. Why should Isadora be taking care of him? But something in her eyes made Liam feel like her junior. The things that Liam might usually think he had over her, such as his understanding of particle physics, how to wire a circuit board, the quantum properties of supercooled fluids, even how to work a soldering gun, were irrelevant here. Liam could code in Python, Java, JavaScript, and C#, but his Spanish was abysmal. He wouldn't know the first thing about how to jump a moving train or how to find water in the Chihuahuan desert. His book knowledge was rendered useless compared to Izzy's implacable determination, her knack for survival, not to mention her freely offered compassion. Izzy was also worried for Mitchell, calling him Liam's hermano. Liam was pretty sure hermano meant brother. He was quick to shake his head no and correct her. "Mitchell's not my hermano. He's my amigo?" Liam offered, settling on that word only because he did not know the Spanish for lab partner or neighbor. He was still uncertain of this feeling of obligation he carried for Mitchell. Liam mostly figured it was a sort of guilt. Guilt from getting Mitchell involved in this mess in the first place. Liam wasn't sure he wanted all the obligations that came with being friends, much less brothers. It was Saturday morning when the guards let some children out to eat. They started with just a few cages at a time, keeping the number of kids manageable. The children, having been starved for days, proceeded to the cafeteria in slow and shuffling lines. Some were so dizzy they had to lean on one another in order not to fall over. Liam, Hugo, and their cellmates were ordered to walk in a single-file line. This was Liam's first actual trip to the cafeteria. The space was demarcated by more empty shelving units, plywood, and particle board. It had been cleaned up from the riot days before. The tables, chairs, and floors had been wiped clean. The scattered dishes, trays, and utensils had been picked up. The president's face was waiting for them. He was their constant companion in all the corridors and rooms. In the cafeteria, he looked down on them from opposite sides of the room, as if the kids themselves were nothing more than the invisible space between himself and his own reflection. Siento que soy la carne entre dos rebanados de mierda. A pesar mi hambre, creo que he perdido el apetito. Someone laughed. Someone else in line shushed them. The meal line resembled a high school cafeteria buffet. The contract workers who served them from behind the buffet were men and women from the neighboring town. They were obviously not under the same orders as the guards to be unfriendly. They were sympathetic, giving the kids heaping portions of scrambled eggs, toast, and grits. They actually smiled at the kids, even telling a few of them good morning. Liam read the care as genuine. The cafeteria workers filled paper cups to the brim with OJ, cranberry juice, and milk. They even refilled them quickly when the kids drank them down on the spot and held the cups out again, hoping for more. They obliged. A few changes were apparent to Liam since his tumbling flight over the cafeteria a few days earlier. Leo confirmed them to him. The plastic trays and bowls had been replaced by cardboard and paper ones. All the utensils were now brittle plastic, barely sturdy enough to eat with, much less fashion into any sort of weapon. The space itself, with close to 3 dozen tables, was mostly empty. Management appeared determined to only have a small number of kids in the space at any one time. Samantha Carlyle was the only row sister on internship duty that morning, her skirt and blouse replaced by a Cerberus security uniform to match the guards. She paced the perimeter, moving past one canine officer, then another. Samantha's hands were clasped behind her back. Her fingertips didn't glow, nor did she float. She was keeping her powers hidden from the regular guards. At least, she was for now. Maybe Hugo had been onto something. Maybe the guards really would quit if they knew whom they were working for. The cafeteria workers would. Liam was certain of that. They were not on power trips like the guards. Instead, they came across simply as decent human beings in hairnets and aprons, looking for work and likely hating the only job they could find. Clearly, the same couldn't be said for the sorority sisters or the guards. But if the sorority sisters wanted to keep their powers on the down low, it might play to the advantage of the kids. When the detainees had finished their meals, every single cup, bowl, and plate was clear. Although they kept their heads down and their voices silent in a show of submission, Liam detected an alertness in his companions. He definitely felt stronger for having eaten. When the guards ordered them to line up and return to their cages, the kids stood up with the quick obedience of army cadets. They began to file out toward the gap in shelving units that was the improvised entrance. As casually as they could, the children spaced themselves out evenly. Their line stretched the length of the room and subtly placed one K-9 guard between 2 sets of children each. Valentine was at the rear. Leo was at the front. Just before Leo passed through the gap to turn the corner and exit back to the cages, Valentine cried out, "Ahora!" The kids swarmed the officers and dogs alike, unafraid of either and quickly overwhelming them with their numbers. Even the smallest children cooperated to distract the dogs, while others restrained them by their collars. The guards, at first, did not panic, confident that their superior strength and size would win out. They moved as if they had even expected this. It was for that reason they had kept the group small. Even Samantha kept her cool, keeping both feet planted on the ground while she waited for the guards to reassert control. But they hadn't counted on tasers. It was Izzy who tiptoed in close behind Samantha. Liam felt his own jolt of vindictive pleasure as Izzy jabbed the taser into the small of Samantha's back, then a second time in between her shoulder blades. Both times the taser let out a pop and a crackle. Samantha stiffened. Her arms flailed, her legs locked, her jaw clattered. Her eyes grew wide just before she teetered over onto a tabletop and started mumbling, semi-conscious. 3 more zaps from around the room. The guards went down, flopping like fish. Their tasers and pepper spray joined the children's arsenal. The cafeteria workers kept their expressions neutral, even though Liam knew that neutral was practically on their side. The workers made no moves to help the guards. They didn't even sound the alarm. Instead, they gathered in a corner, ducking behind the buffet. They're helping by doing nothing. Vámonos! Pre-assigned teams with tasers, pepper spray, and sets of keys dispersed to the other cages. It wasn't long before Liam heard the zap of other guards going down. Dogs were barking. Those barks turned to yelps as they found themselves on the business end of 50,000 volts. Animals were harmed in the making of this prison break. Isadora clambered over a table with Valentine. Armed with a taser himself, Hugo found Liam and pulled him by the arm around a pile of children zip-tying an unconscious guard. "Come on, Liam, this way!" He didn't need to say it twice. Even if Liam had lost his sense of direction, Hugo hadn't. He led them between store shelves and plywood walls, slowing to check around corners. They reached the door to the special section. It looked innocent enough, just the same as the day they had arrived. Just another innocuous office door painted in the same cerulean blue that accented the other walls and pillars of the ghost box. These had been the corporate colors in the building's previous retail life, when it had been a public place of commerce, not a black site for detention. Hugo yanked open the door and shot inside. The hall on the other side was empty and dark. He swung the taser up in front of him. After a beat, he read the hall as clear and rushed in farther. The corridor made a right turn around a blind corner. Hugo peeked around before waving Liam after him. "Come on, it's empty." This stretch of hallway ran the length of the whole building. They started down it. Office doors opened to either side. The offices on their left faced outside into the parking lot. Liam could see it was a cloudy, blustery day. Wind was flattening rust-colored leaves against the layers of security fencing. Security fencing? They still had to find a way through all that. One thing at a time, Liam told himself. The offices on their right had no natural light, but each had a window into the hall. These interior offices were the ones converted into holding cells. All the furniture and fixtures had been removed, turning them into bare, empty cubes. Empty, except for a single child in each one. They were all members of the Caravan of the Mutilated. Each was curled up in one corner or the other. Hugo pounded the window and called out to each by their name. The kids were exceedingly slow to respond. Eventually, a few looked up to Hugo. As they did, Liam felt a hollow open in his stomach. They all wore the same forlorn face of abject despair. Their eyes were empty, ghost-like, rimmed by red and puffy skin. "Ethan, Alejandro, Chiara, Dominic, Camilla, we're here. We're getting you out." Hugo turned to Liam. "We've got to find the keys." "Yeah, okay," Liam said. "I'll look for them." But Liam didn't see where the keys might be. Maybe in one of the offices with a window? Maybe they should have taken key rings from the guards? And he still needed to find Mitchell. He ran farther down the hall, looking for both. "Liam, down here!" It was Mateo. Liam followed the sound of his voice. Mateo was the only kid not curled up. He was pounding on the window of his cell with his stump, holding himself up to the frame with his 2 fingers and thumb, their knuckles white with the effort. Hugo was there immediately. "Teo!" Words couldn't describe the joy of the reunion between brothers, and for a moment, Liam envied them. He knew he had never felt such a connection, at least not with anyone still living. "Liam, Mitchell is over there," Mateo said, jerking his head down the hall. Liam ran 2 more office windows down until he saw a tiny figure with that auburn Albert Einstein hair, chameleon boxers, and Let's Eat Grandma shirt. Mitchell was in the corner of his cell, legs pulled up to his chest, his face buried in his knees. "Mitchell!" Liam cried out. An unexpected pain pinched at his chest. When Mitchell didn't respond, Liam pounded against the window, then found himself rushing to the door to try the knob. It was unlocked. That's strange. Liam pushed inside. He scrambled down to the floor next to Mitchell. Liam shook him gently by the shoulder as if trying to wake him from sleep. Mitchell, you okay? We're here to get you out." Mitchell's head lifted by degrees so he could just peek over the enclosure of his forearms. The extent to which he looked like a poster child for some PSA against child abuse made Liam shiver. For the briefest of moments, Mitchell's eyes flickered with recognition. "Liam, you came." But his relief was gone in an instant. He dropped his head back into his arms and knees and began to weep. "But you shouldn't have come, Liam. You shouldn't have come." "What are you talking about? We're escaping, Mitchell. Come on, let's get out of here." Liam tried to help him up, but Mitchell felt as heavy and immovable as stone. No, it's too late. Everything is too late." "It's not. Come on." But then Liam felt it. A cold, heavy sense of darkness came over his body, an anvil of ice crushing him to the floor. It was so pervasive and sudden that it was impossible to remember what being warm had ever felt like, as if that memory and every other happy memory had been ripped right out of his mind. In their absence, unbidden, all his most painful memories rushed in to fill the void. Liam recalled the hours at his mother's bedside in the last weeks of her life, The sense of powerlessness turned to self-loathing that he had felt because he couldn't help her. A loathing that had told Liam that, despite the number of times his mother said, "I love you," he knew he would never be worthy of it. He remembered creeping downstairs to find his father tearing up in his workshop at night, then working on the damnable DNA until dawn. He remembered his mother's funeral, the arrival of Aunt Cece and Uncle Fletch the afternoon his father disappeared, the slow accretion of certainty that his father wasn't coming back, the memory of stumbling outside and walking in a daze to the observatory garden. Liam had gone there because, in happier times, his family picnicked by the observatory, but now all he could recall were the times he had wandered there to sit under boughs of his favorite holly tree and cry. Cry just as Mitchell was crying now, a perfect mirror to Liam's own broken heart. At least now Liam felt close to Mitchell and a shared sense of despair. It was all pointless, all hopeless. Liam came to accept this, came to recognize the hard but undeniable truth that they all were completely alone in the universe. There was really no point in resisting that truth, or even any point in living. "No," Liam managed to say, standing. He backed away from Mitchell as if Mitchell were the source of it all, the source of this misery that Liam did not want to relive, the overwhelming, utter meaninglessness of life. "No," Liam said again, backing toward the door. That was when he saw it, a shadowy figure present in the room with them. Its features somewhat resembled a human, but just barely. The body tapered into amorphous ectoplasm, the arms into mere wisps. The face had more clarity. Melting eyes, no nose, but a mouth open, as if in a long, unending sob. Out of the mouth came a voice. Many voices. Crying, sobbing. It was the sound of inconsolable lament. Those eyes, so full of pain and mourning, Liam could not bear to have them turned on him. But turn on him it did, like Edvard Munch's painting The Scream come to life. The figure's handless arms reached out for Liam. He staggered, reeling with nothing more than a crushing sense of defeat. It was so heavy, so all-encompassing. This shadow had such weight on his body, on his heart, on his mind. Liam realized he couldn't imagine happiness any more than he could remember warmth. Only his most unbearable memories cycled through his consciousness now. It was an endless loop of pain and loss, pain and loss, pain and loss. That was all there was. His whole life was one long, interminable experience of anguish and despair. That was all it ever had been, all it ever could be. It was foolish to believe anything else. There was nothing worth living for, worth hoping for. That was the inevitable, unescapable conclusion. Why hadn't he seen it sooner? Liam knew he should just curl up and die. Better yet, just kill himself to make the pain stop. Some instinct to survive, or maybe just to avoid the pain of slitting his wrists as he wanted to, still remained somewhere in Liam. Somewhere this misery had yet to reach and smother. Maybe it was Liam's brainstem, maybe his amygdala. Whatever the case, something sent the impulses to his muscles to turn around, to move in the direction of the door. He thought he heard some commotion, some noises, but they sounded far away, as if underwater. Why try? What's the point? But Liam tried. One foot, then the other. Liam was able to turn his back to the weird ghost, this intrusive specter of woe, hovering over Mitchell and stalking toward him. Even so, Liam felt himself sliding to the floor. No, just one more step. Liam could barely see. He felt the wall with his right hand, felt the door frame with the other. He was a drowning swimmer, but almost to the surface. If he could just get back into the hallway. He pushed himself into the doorway and forced his eyes to open. Officer Trey was waiting, filling his vision, more impassable than any wall. That had been the noise Liam had heard, Officer Trey's voice, the jangle of keys on his belt, and his approaching footsteps. The giant of a man grinned, made a fist, cocked it back, and punched Liam in the face. Chapter 27. Be clean, be green, save the planet. Upon coming to, Liam experienced the following series of thoughts, noting them as he went. Number 1, he was coming to. Number 2, his face hurt. Number 3, he was still trapped in the ghost box. He recognized the same tiled floor and acoustic ceiling tiles from the offices dubbed the special section. Number 4, this all was very strange. Number 5, he was seated in a chair, unrestrained but completely unwilling and unmotivated to get up because, Number 6, he really didn't care to get up, or to live, really. Number 7, and furthermore, he wasn't even sure he could move if he wanted to, as, Number 8, his body felt so unusually heavy. Number 9, yep, really strange. Number 10, yep, face still hurt. Number 11, it really hurt. Number 12, but that was nothing. Liam noted he was weighed down with something else, something he could only describe as a crushing sadness, something so exhaustively sad he could only think of it as a soul sickness. Number 13. He added that note to the one that his face really hurt. Then Liam tried to remember if he had already noted that his face hurt. Number 13. Or had he just done 13? Was this 14? Well, whatever it was, he made a note that he had lost count and decided to restart. New number 1. Yep, this all was definitely strange. New number 2. And reflecting on it, Liam was still definitely very, very sad. New number 3. This all left Liam hopeless and deflated. So hopeless and deflated that he made further note that he was genuinely disappointed to be waking up at all and only wished, in that moment, that he were dead. New number 4. Was that further note about wishing he were dead? Was that number 16, or was it new number 3, or was it a subnote? In which case, if it were a subnote, that still did not determine whether or not it was subnote 16.1 or 3.1. Subnote to thought number 16 or new number 3. Maybe letters would be better at this point. For example, number 16A or new number 3A, as well as number 16B or new number 3B? Subnote to thought number 16 or new number 3, aka number 16A or new number 3A, which would make this current thought number 16B or possibly new number 3B. On further consideration of letters, Liam could not quite remember what letter the alphabet started with. It seemed like A might be a good choice, but there was also B, and then there was Alpha and Beta to choose from. Those were candidates that stepped up to the fore in his mind, too. He could just barely recall that he lived in a place where Greek letters mattered. Subnote to thought number 16, or yet to be new number 3, aka 16A, or was it 3B? Speaking of Greek, maybe Roman numerals would add something? That would make this number 16 or 3. Subnote to thought number 16, or yet to be new number 3, aka 16B or now 3C. Nope, that was a bad idea. Number 17. Wait, things were clearing up. This was definitely 17, in which case it wasn't new, and he should probably denote that somehow. Original list 17. Or was this 18 now? He needed to start over. New number 1 version 2.0. Yep, all this was definitely strange. New number 2 version 2.0. His face still hurt. Liam gave up numbering his thoughts. It was too much effort to think about his thinking just then anyway. The same inescapable sense of loss and despair from earlier was still hanging heavily over him. Along with it came the memories of losing both parents, the alienation of living on a campus full of people, yet feeling all alone, Sensing he was not privileged enough to relate to the white kids, not cool enough to relate to the black ones, not Latinx enough, not Asian enough, not LGBTQ, goth, punk, cosplay, nerd enough, not an ally enough to feel solidarity or to fit in. Just all around not enough. Everyone had somewhere to belong but him. There was a word for that. A failure. A throwaway. Trash can kid. Self-loathing and self-pity jostled together like rock'em sock'em robots in Liam's mind. There was not space for anything else. It all had the effect of convincing Liam further that this life wasn't worth living at all, and that he should have given up long before. Having been born was itself a monumental stroke of bad luck, a cosmic mistake if there ever was one. Maybe Liam could just will himself to stop breathing. Maybe that way he could end it all. That would be less unpleasant than biting off his tongue and swallowing the blood until he died. He had once heard that ninja assassins were trained to do that if ever caught by the enemy. Could he even move his tongue right now? Liam tried.
"Well, if it isn't the half-breed, finally waking up,"
said a deep voice that sounded like Officer Trey. Liam abandoned experimenting with his tongue to instead focus on lifting his head up. It was a bowling ball on a slinky. His eyelids were so heavy, it wasn't until he forced them open that he realized he had been crying. "Please, just kill me," Liam said, noting that his tongue and mouth were still working even if his tongue wouldn't go back in his mouth the way he wanted it to. Instead, it hung out like he was a tranquilized dog. How embarrassing.
"Soon enough,"
Officer Trey said. Officer Trey was sitting in a chair, its back turned to face them, so that the Titanic security guard could rest a single massive forearm across it. Liam actually was relieved to see Trey, as he was certain the security guard wasn't lying when he said he would be killing him soon, and dying was on the top of Liam's to-do list just then. "Please," Liam heard himself say once he had wrangled control of his tongue again. "I'm ready to die." "Liam, no! It's just the creatures. You have to fight them." It was Mateo's voice. Liam half turned his head to glance to his left. His tongue lolled out again, but he was too apathetic to feel embarrassed now. Across a row of seated figures whom Liam recognized as Mitchell and Hugo, he saw Mateo, straining up in his chair. Unlike the others, Mateo was tied up, a curious choice since he was the one least likely to run away, having just one leg. But Liam concluded that perhaps these bindings were just to hold Teo up in his chair, as he only had one arm. Wait, you don't need arms to sit in a chair, do you? Liam made himself focus. He could almost hear Jeannie's voice back in the Lambeth workshop. "Focus, people. Focus, Liam." Liam blinked and willed his bowling ball on a slinky head up again. Now he could see that, like Hugo and Mitchell, Mateo was also wreathed in a swirl of shadowy forms. These specters coalesced around Mateo more than anyone else. Yet, ironically, Mateo was also the least affected by those escaped figures from an Edvard Munch painting. Mateo's eyes were wide, his gaze sharp, his head up, his partial limbs strained in a heroic, if futile, effort against the ropes binding him. Liam looked down at the gray-black mist around his own chest with flat apathy. The tendrils shifted and resolved. In one moment, the shape was the same phantasm of sadness that had walked through the wall earlier. Then, in another, it was a giant smoking tapeworm. Both shapes ate away at the cavity in Liam's chest where his heart would be if he still had one, which he was certain he no longer did. He observed this all with detachment. At this point, he welcomed this parasitic ghost, as long as it might finish consuming him and end his miserable existence sooner rather than later. Liam's tongue was still hanging out in a less than dignified manner. He considered going full ninja and biting it off. Anything to make the pain in his life stop. Death would be such a relief. He took a few test bites of his tongue.
"What's this half-breed idiot doing?"
Officer Trey asked.
Like a ninja.
"I think he's trying to say something about ninjas," a second voice said. It sounded like Samantha Carlyle.
"Don't give in, Liam!"
Mateo cried. Officer Trey was laughing.
"Those woebegons. They do the trick every time."
Trey was talking to someone. Liam made the Herculean effort to shift his eyes to the other side of his sockets. Samantha Carlyle came into focus. She was standing to Trey's left. Samantha matched her supervisor in uniform, but not in affect. Her expression was far from Trey's self-satisfied gloating. Instead, the corners of Samantha's mouth curled downward. Her nose was wrinkled, her lips curled, as if she actually was watching a tapeworm consume its host. Despite her green-hued complexion, one hand on her stomach, the other on her throat, Samantha was doing her best to maintain the professional air her internship required of her. Officer Trey, by contrast, sounded fascinated, entertained, even. He mashed down on his toothpick faster than ever. He was beginning to slaver, saliva stringing in his mouth. Liam could now see that Trey's canines were oversized, like his forearms, biceps, and everything else on his body. The security guard reminded Liam of a pumped-up jock in a sports bar, full of roid rage as he cheered on his team while it ran up a 90-6 score against a much weaker opponent. Sportsmanship be damned. The greater the humiliation, the better. Trey's thirst for confirmation of his own superiority and the victimhood of others was bottomless and forever unquenchable. He was a bully in every respect. Now, finally, Trey lifted those mirrored aviators and removed them. He pinched their tiny arms in his massive bratwurst fingers, pointing them at Mateo. Somehow, with his glasses removed, Officer Trey was even more terrifying. His naked eyes were burning. Liam couldn't settle on what color they were. For a moment, Trey's eyes were gray, then a bilious green, then a shade of yellow-brown, like a clogged toilet bowl. It was jarring, as if different sets of eyes were jostling about in his head and looking out in turns. The only sure quality about them was the celebratory hate in them, and the sadistic pleasure that came from the boy's suffering.
"This crippled one on the end is odd, though. Never seen anything like it,"
Trey said, shaking his glasses at Mateo.
"It's like his specters can't even get through, like they're not getting any nourishment from him. See here, Sam, if you look at them, they're skimpier than the others. They're starving. But that don't make any sense. Look at him. He should have plenty of suffering in his life for them to feast on."
"Hugo! Mitchell, don't give in! Don't let them win!" Mateo cried out, ignoring Officer Trey altogether. That was curious, Liam thought, even if the spark of interest that rose in him was extinguished as soon as it kindled. Liam imagined this was due to the woebegone, or whatever Trey had called this thing eating his heart.
"Cállate ahora. No eres más que una mancha y un inodoro,"
Officer Trey barked. That was curious, too, since when could Officer Trey speak Spanish? But again, as soon as the line of inquisitiveness flared, it was snuffed out. Liam descended back into apathy, followed by suicidal despair. Hugo leaned forward with a groan, his face shading to the color of ash as if he were close to death. Mateo switched to a furious, rapid Spanish, calling out his brother's name. Liam couldn't understand a word. Such passion and defiance were as incomprehensible to Liam in that moment as the Spanish language itself. But now Officer Trey bared those sharp teeth, leaning over the chair back, half standing. A guttural sound escaped from somewhere deep in his torso.
"You don't know your place."
Then something else strange happened. Officer Trey began to speak a whole different language. It was some language full of biting, hard-edged consonants, clipped and choked vowels, and other noises Liam couldn't categorize as anything other than bestial. It raised goosebumps on his skin. Officer Trey swung his arm out, pointed at Mateo, and commanded the other specters to converge on him. As his own parasite left him, Liam felt a change. A curtain lifted in his mind. It felt as if the room had been very dark before and someone had just turned the lights back on. Memories came back to him. His mother making him PBJ sandwiches with smiley faces made of peanuts and raisins set on the bread slices. his father teaching him to fly a balsa wood plane, all three of them on a paddle boat, racing Uncle Fletch and his daughter Camille, picnics in the sunken garden, stargazing at the observatory. Those happy memories and more flooded back. They hit Liam with such potency that he felt like weeping anew, not out of sadness, but relief that he did indeed have such experiences within him after all. For a moment, the sadness and happiness of Liam's life were poised at an equilibrium, leaving him in a sense of melancholic gratitude. He still carried pain, a hole in his heart the shape of a family. He realized he had tried to fill that hole with his projects, his nighttime bike rides, his work on the DMA, even by creating an AI companion, with only partial success. But now, without the woebegone draining his soul, Liam's desire to live resurfaced, as did a sense of injustice at what was unfolding before him, even to him. He needed to protect himself and the others. They were still trapped, still in danger, and now, Mateo most of all.
"You stay there,"
Officer Trey roared. He leaned over his chair, commanding Hugo and Mitchell, who, like Liam, were also recovering in the absence of the woebegones. Trey looked to have grown larger to fill the room as he spoke. His eyes continued to shift in color as he glowered down at Mateo. His toothpick was ground to soggy splinters that stuck to the side of his cheek. Trey's hand was bending the back of the chair where he gripped it. His eyes darted left and right, but his attention always shifted back to Mateo. Mateo, who, despite the whirl of ephemeral creatures around him, was still fighting, still resisting, his eyes clenched shut.
"Teo!"
Hugo stood up from his chair. No sooner had he done so than Trey swung forward with a huge paw-like hand and slapped him backward. Hugo flew across the room and collapsed against the wall, dazed.
"I told you wetbacks to stay still."
Mateo let out a slight cry, twisting against his physical restraints, but still more concentrated on the assault to his spirit. He was whispering what Liam thought to be prayers in broken bits of Spanish and even Hebrew, his piote swaying alongside his face. His chair shook with his fighting. The woebegones let out their own wails, constricting ever more tightly around Mateo. It was clear these were their own cries of unsatiated hunger, their own frustrated appetites. Something had to give in the vicious back and forth. It did. One woebegone found some weakness in Mateo's defenses. It thrashed as it chomped down on his breast. Mateo let out a breathless cry. The other woebegones converged on this space in his chest, fighting one another like lampreys.
"Officer Trey, maybe he has had enough,"
Samantha whimpered, her hand over her heart.
"Shut up. I'll decide when he's had enough."
"But, sir,"
Samantha started, but her sentence trailed off. Liam was surprised she questioned Trey at all, but perhaps a double amputee asylum-seeking kid was enough to break through even Samantha's shell of bias and indifference.
"Shut up,"
Trey growled back, not even looking at her.
"Didn't you say in your job interview, Samantha, that these illegals should go back where they came from?"
Well...
But Samantha, confronted with her own words, had nothing more to say. This ended the debate. Trey leaned in close to Mateo, the giant guard's nose twitching, the corner of his mouth lifting.
"Not long now. No one can fight forever."
The room shook with a loud explosion, a thundering crash that left the walls wobbling and the floor shaking. A curtain of dust came down from the place where the ceiling had buckled. The acoustic tiles had cracked. Trey and Samantha leaned on the nearest furniture to catch themselves.
"What was that?"
Officer Trey said. He turned to the door so fast that he knocked over his chair and nearly Samantha too. Whatever the noise had been, it had come from the hallway. It was followed by more crashes. The door and window to the corridor outside rattled in their frames. The clamor of further collisions, what sounded like a demolition crew taking to the building with unrestrained enthusiasm, closed in on their position. The commotion grew louder and louder, closer and closer. The room kept shaking. Liam couldn't see much of anything through the office window. The hall remained empty except for more curtains of dust falling from the ceiling. Their own reflections danced in the wobbling glass. The lights overhead began to flicker. Another series of tremors rocked the building, foundation to roof. It was followed by a third, a fourth, then a cascade of so many that they were impossible to count, like so many demolition charges going off in a sequence, blasting through one wall after another. Under it all was a growing rumble, like that of a diesel engine shifting gears.
What the hell?
Officer Trey looked around at the shaking walls and the now steady rain of ceiling tiles dropping to the floor and breaking. The desk in the center of the room was vibrating, as if they were in an earthquake. Trey took 2 swift steps, crossing the room. He grabbed hold of the doorknob, ripped open the door, and stepped out. He got hit by a truck. A giant lime green and orange recycling truck, to be exact. It emerged from a growing avalanche of shattered drywall, office furniture, and tangled wiring that filled the frame of the window, but not soon enough to be a warning to Officer Trey. The truck collided with him in a bone-jarring bang. And like that, the on-site manager for Cerberus Security was there, and then he wasn't. The blur of the truck lasted only milliseconds longer than Trey's last stand, but it was just long enough for Liam to recognize the familiar slogans on the side of the truck: "Be clean, be green, save the planet." The logo was accompanied by helpful tips on how to compost, sort plastic, and safely dispose of electronics. Dust and exhaust enveloped Samantha, who had moved to follow her supervisor. The blowback slammed her against the wall. She slid down to the floor next to Mateo's chair. The wobegons, sensing easier prey, uncoiled from Mateo and descended upon the Rowe sister. Samantha had no defenses. She couldn't even cry out. The life drained out of her, her voice cut off as all the creatures began to devour her from within. Hugo got up slowly from the corner where he had landed. He staggered over to join Mitchell, who was already untying Mateo.
"Estás bien?"
Hugo asked his brother.
Sí, sí.
The brothers' embrace was brief as Mitchell helped Mateo to Hugo's back. Mateo settled in quickly, hanging on with his stump around Hugo's shoulders and chest. They were long practiced at this arrangement. Liam was going to the door to see what had happened and to find a way out, but he didn't get far before Mitchell crashed into him, wrapping Liam in a hug. "Mitchell, what are you doing?"
Thanks, Liam,
Mitchell said in a voice muffled into his side.
Thanks for coming to get me.
Liam was unsure what to say. It all was so emotional and embarrassing. The Nolesco brothers were both smiling. All Liam could think was how all this happiness was ridiculous and premature. They hadn't even really escaped yet. Although Officer Trey getting run over by an errant recycling truck was a lucky, if unforeseen, break, they were far from safe. Yeah, sure, but we still need to get out of here, Mitchell."
Okay, right,
Mitchell said, releasing him. Liam noticed Mitchell looking up to him the same way Hugo looked to Mateo. It sort of looked like pride or something. Whatever it was, it made him so uncomfortable. He wanted to get out of this ghost box more than ever. He felt like danger was coming, even if it was just a vulnerability bubbling up within him. That felt scarier than whatever might await them outside the room. "Let's go," Liam said, moving to the door. There were no useful tasers, no weapons of opportunity in sight, but he hoped he might be able to pick up a stick of lumber or some broken piece of furniture in the hallway. Hugo was quick to follow Liam, but Mateo cried out from his brother's back, "Wait!" Hugo stopped, turning to look over his shoulder at Mateo.
"We can't leave her,"
Mateo said. He didn't have a free arm to point, but they knew he meant Samantha Carlyle. Her writhing was growing more and more lethargic. The wobegons had grown fat, devouring her soul, and were constricting like thick fire hoses around her.
"Are you loco? The gringa voladora?"
"No, I'm not. Hugo, you know we can't leave her.
"I'm not letting you go near those things."
I can fight them. I don't know how, but I can."
Liam could read the indecision on Hugo's face. It was a protectiveness for his just rescued brother, combined with his own fear of stepping close to those monsters again, an even bigger risk now that the specters had gained size and strength by draining Samantha. But in the end, he trusted his brother.
"Fine."
Hugo crossed back to the corner of the room, kneeling and turning so as to allow Mateo the angle to reach into the shadow vortex around Samantha. Mateo stretched out his good arm for Samantha's limp one. Hugo held fast to his brother's stump. His face turned red from exertion, then gray as the proximity to the woebegons took effect. Mateo remained whole and alert, immune to the monsters. He secured a hold on Samantha's wrist. "I got her!" Hugo straightened his knees and lifted all of them, hefting up Mateo, who dropped his one foot to the ground to help. The two of them dragged the row sister free. Samantha gasped, a free diver surfacing. Life rushed back into her. The woebegons, recognizing that their meal had slipped away, twisted up into the air, poised to strike like a many-headed hydra. They darted straight for Samantha as she lay on the floor, panting. But she was not helpless. Her fingertips pulsed with light. Before the monsters could seize her, she lifted her free hand and blasted out a 5-pronged fork of lightning. The flash blinded everyone in the room. Liam ducked away from the heat. The ensuing explosion knocked the 4 boys against the wall along with all the chairs. In the aftermath, the small space of the ruined office reeked of ozone and the acrid scent of scorched hair. What was left of the woebegons was smoke. Regular smoke, not some gaseous Edvard Munch ectoplasm. It drifted out the door in the draft from the newly cavernous hallway. They were all coughing. Liam could see Samantha's fingertips still aglow. "Guys, watch out," Mitchell said, afraid Samantha was about to strike. Liam knew better. No, it's okay," Liam said, half question, half statement, as Samantha brought her fist to her mouth to stifle a series of hacking coughs. The light in her fingertips faded. She opened her eyes and rocked her head back against the wall. Whether it was from the rawness of her throat or the weakness in the wake of the assault on her spirit, she had no energy left to speak. She wasn't going to fry them. The look in her eyes was enough for Liam to know that for sure. They had a truce. Mateo knew it too. "We can go now," he said. "Por fin. Vámonos," Hugo said, securing his brother to his back and making for the door.